Everyone has heard of the abandoned theme park, the creepy dolls, the eerie, empty buildings, but today we're focusing on specific creepy stories told by urban explorers and scientists from right inside the irradiated exclusion zone. So let's get started. We're gonna kick things off with a ghost story told by a nuclear physicist named Andrei Khrushchev after he visited Pripyat in 1997. He toured the number 4 reactor sarcophagus where the explosion had taken place. He was taking readings for radiation when he heard what sounded like screams coming from the inside, which was completely off limits due to the radiation. He described the experience saying, quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years. And the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside the reactor when I wasn't looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically. The reactor door requires a password and handprint, yet someone or something was inside. Later that evening, as we were eating dinner outside the building by the river next to the plant, a floodlight turned on in the room of the installation. There was no way anyone could be inside. As we ate, we figured there was a power surge or something. Then, just as my colleague said that, the light turned off." Next up is the Blackbird of Chernobyl. We've all heard of the Mothman before, who was spotted leading up to the collapsing of the Silver Bridge in West Virginia. Well, eerily, a very similar creature was said to be seen by several control room workers in the power plant just days before the explosion in 1986. A number of men reported seeing this massive, winged, shadowy creature with glowing red eyes flying over Chernobyl. After witnessing the creature, many of the men claimed to be plagued with horrible nightmares. Now, what makes this particular cryptid kind of frustrating is that there's not a lot of info on it. Unfortunately, most of the men who would have seen this thing died in the incident, so only vague stories have been passed on. It seems though that both the Mothman and the Blackbird showed up just before disaster struck as harbingers of doom, or perhaps they're moths drawn to a flame, the flame of imminent death and destruction. Next up on the list, we have the Red Forest. Now, the Red Forest is the most irradiated forested area surrounding Chernobyl. The trees have this reddish color after having absorbed high levels of ionizing radiation. The soil and water is heavily contaminated, but there are a lot of animals that actually call this place home. The boar population spiked as humans up and left. There are plenty of wolves and foxes, but they've evolved in weird ways. More on that later on. But for example, birds in the area actually have much smaller brains than other birds outside of the contaminated areas. We all love to imagine that toxic radiation result in like superpowers or something, but that is sadly not the case, at least not immediately. Eventually nature adapts, but it takes a bit of time. That's gonna lead us to a pretty freaky experiment that went on in the Red Forest. So we've already discussed how heavily irradiated this part of the exclusion zone is. Well, this experiment from a few years back makes this abundantly clear. Scientists wanted to test how the radiation affected the insects, microbes, and fungi in the area that aid in decomposition. It seemed that the trees in the Red Forest that died right after the incident in 1986 weren't decaying properly. At the time these researchers were looking into it, it had been about 20 years since the incident, and fallen trees, which would typically be like sawdust and any other forest, were virtually unscathed. So the team of researchers, led by a biologist at the University of South Carolina, Columbia, named Timothy Massow, decided to do an experiment. They filled a bunch of mesh bags with leaves from a variety of trees in uncontaminated areas, then placed them throughout different areas of forest surrounding Chernobyl, some contaminated and some not. They returned after a year, they gathered up these bags, and they discovered that the leaves left in the most irradiated areas were virtually untouched, while leaves left in the uncontaminated areas were basically gone, having been recycled back into the soil by the healthy microbes and fungi. This means that these heavily irradiated areas aren't decaying and regrowing at a proper rate. great. It also means that there's a very high amount of leaf litter on the forest floor that could lead to forest fires, potentially spreading radiation outside of the exclusion zone. Next up, we have a Reddit post written by someone who decided to venture into the exclusion zone and had an eerie encounter with a set of dolls. They wrote the following: "A buddy and I decided to venture into the heart of Pripyat. Always had a weird fascination with it and just wanted to say I'd done it, you know? Just explore what is basically a post-apocalyptic landscape. First, it was pretty much what we expected: crumbling buildings, overgrown playgrounds, and the unsettling silence that comes with any big deserted place. But the hospital had to be the most bone-chilling part of the whole trip. Old medical equipment, dusty beds. We even saw a couple dolls scattered around. Now, I've seen my fair share of creepy dolls in horror movies, even supposedly haunted ones in antique stores and stuff like that, but this was different, and it didn't end there. At one point, I swear we heard faint whispers coming from down the hallway. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us, but the whispers started to get more distinct. Buddy joked that the dolls were trying to speak to us, and that's when I got this uncanny feeling. Not saying that was exactly what was going on, but I don't know, something just told me it was time to leave. But as we left the room, the whispers seemed to follow us. We couldn't shake the feeling that those dolls were watching us, their lifeless eyes piercing through us. We'd also taken Geiger counters with us, which started acting up. We couldn't find a logical explanation for the sudden spike in radiation. It felt like the city itself was alive, reacting to our presence. I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about that room and those dolls left us with such an uneasy feeling." Alright, we've all heard about the mutated animals in Pripyat, so let's talk about some specific ones, like the dogs. A recent study was done to see if there were differences between the wild dogs living close to the Chernobyl power plant and dogs living outside of the exclusion zone. Scientists from the University of South Carolina and the National Human Genome Research Institute decided to study 302 of these wild dogs, and the research is still in its early stages, but it seems as if these dogs may be thriving in the harsh environment. After the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, everyone was evacuated, but many pets, including of course dogs, were left behind. There are now thousands of feral dogs living in the surrounding area, so they've been able to reproduce, unlike some animals in the area who seem to have been hindered when it comes to reproduction, like bees, for example. It could be that these feral dogs have built up resistances to the radiation, growing to be more immune to cancer, for example, which would be pretty incredible. But it's not only dogs that have evolved in weird ways since the disaster in '86. Frogs in the exclusion zone have also changed because of the high amounts of radiation. Back in 2016, Pablo Barraco and German Orezuela, two Spanish researchers who were looking into the environmental changes in Pripyat, made an odd discovery: black frogs. Now, a black frog on its own isn't all that strange. There are plenty of frogs that are dark in color, but the Hyla orientalis tree frog, typically found in the area, is a bright shade of green, or at least they were before the radiation in the area seemed to change them. So why are the frogs in this radiated zone darker in color? Well, they've grown to adapt. These frogs have more melanin, which means they're less likely to suffer cell damage from radiation exposure. Pretty amazing, like how quickly nature is able to grow and adapt even in the harshest conditions. Eventually, it just overcomes. Next up, we have another Reddit post I'm going to call Laughter in the Night. It was written by a now deleted user. Hey, fellow urban explorers, I've been meaning to share this experience from my recent trip to Chernobyl. So me and a couple friends decided to venture into the heart of the exclusion zone. We had explored Pripyat during the day, but thought a night trek would be a little more thrilling. We found ourselves near the infamous Ferris wheel. This is creepy enough as it is at night, but my god, I will never forget this one moment for as long as I live. Me and my friends are just bumming around the Ferris wheel. I wasn't paying much attention to what they were talking about, kind of zoning out. I suddenly heard a faint, distant laughter, like children were playing just off in the distance. And it wasn't just me that heard it, everyone went quiet immediately. One of my buddies had the bright idea of following the laughter. I was pretty reluctant, but ultimately we all agreed to have a look. We followed the sound, and as we got closer, it dawned on us, and I you not, we ended up at a school. The laughter had been coming from inside. Then as abruptly as it began, the laughter stopped. We noped out of there screaming. To this day, we can't explain what we heard. Would you have gone and followed the laughter? I don't know. I feel like I'd like to. Like, that sounds interesting. But I don't know. In the moment, I might have just left. I don't know. What do you guys think, though? Let us know in the comments. All right, let's talk about the reported UFO sightings in the days leading up to the Chernobyl disaster. Turns out, it wasn't just the ominous blackbird of Chernobyl that was seen just before Reactor 4 exploded, but unidentified flying objects as well. So what could this mean? Well, your gut instinct might be that if these unidentified objects were indeed alien crafts, that maybe they played a part in setting off the disaster, that they wanted to cause humanity harm for whatever reason. But that's not the popular theory. Might make you feel a lot better to think of it in a different way, that these supposed aliens weren't out to cause us harm, but to actually help mitigate the disaster in some way. There's a theory that these aliens may have reduced the severity of the radiation, and that something that could have been far worse was contained to one area. What's interesting is that this isn't the only time UFOs have been spotted around nuclear disasters. A series of UFOs were spotted in the days following the Fukushima nuclear disaster as well. So I don't know, this is pretty interesting. There could be something to this. Finally though, we have phantom radio signals. This refers to mysterious and unexplained radio transmissions that have been reported by urban explorers within the exclusion zone. These signals often appear on frequencies that should be silent or unused. Explorers equipped with radios have described hearing distorted voices and odd sounds that don't sound like typical radio noise, and some have even claimed to hear vague messages coming through these signals. A possible scientific explanation could be electromagnetic effects lingering from the nuclear disaster, but if you believe in the more paranormal side of things, it's said that these signals may be coming from entities who died in the disaster attempting to make contact through the radio. But again, what do you think? Let us know down in the comments. Would you go and explore Chernobyl? I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.